everyone. So next I'm going to start the environment series as we are talking conservation of biodiversity. So conservation of biodiversity. All right. So this is conservation of biodiversity is a legally binding. It's a legally binding treaty. Okay, first of all, legally binding, a multilateral environment agreement, and the three objectives are conservation, sustainable use of biodiversity, fair and equitable share of benefit arising out of utilization of genetic resources. Conservation of biodiversity was outcome of Earth Summit. So it's Earth Summit Rio de Janeiro, that is 1992 5 June. Okay, so it is came into force 29 December 1993. Secretariat of Conservation of Biodiversity is Secretariat Montreal in Canada. So it is in Montreal in Canada. Okay. So under the aegis of UNEP, at present conservation of biodiversity has 194 parties and 168 signatories. So 194 and 168 signatories. Governing body conservation of parties are 11 meeting have took place 2012. 2012 conservation of party conservation was held in India. So subsidiary body scientific and technological advices that conservation of biodiversity provides sovereign rights over their biological resources and facilitates access to the genetic resources by other parties subject to national legislation and mutual agreed term, and close and traditional dependence of indigenous and local communities, and ensure that these communities share the benefit arising from the use of their traditional knowledge of conservation. So it's also aim prevent the spread of ecological harmful invasive species, and US has signed but didn't ratify the convention. So US has signed this but didn't ratify. What is the facts? It is aims to prevent the spread of ecological harmful invasive species, provide sovereign rights their biological resources, facilitate access the genetic resources other parties subject to national legislation and mutually agreed term, recognize the traditional dependence of indigenous and local community, and share the benefits arising from use of their traditional knowledge and conservation practices. Okay, next one is Cbd Protocol. Cbd Protocol. Cbd Protocol is Cartagena Protocol on Biodiversity. Conservation of biodiversity is known as background protocol on biodiversity is to establish rules and procedure for safe transfer, handling and use of LMO with a specific focus on transboundary movement. So LMO for transboundary movement of the species, that is the Cartagena Protocol. Concept is living modified organism. Any living organism that present a novel combination of genetic material obtained through modern biotechnology. LMO are living genetically modified organism. It is genetically modified organism. Fact, LMO that the pharmaceutical for human and excluded from protocol if they are covered by other international agreement. It is a supplementary agreement to the conservation on biodiversity. Okay, so next is next we are discussing about Nagoya Bio Protocol. Nagoya is in Japan and Cartagena is in America, I think. So Nagoya Protocol is the supplementary agreement of Convention of Biodiversity. Again, Convention of Biodiversity. And genetic resources, plants, animal, microorganisms increasingly valuable in the development of special enzyme enhanced gene as smaller molecule. This can use in many area including crop protection, drug development, the production, chemical or industrial processing. Finding a practical way to share this benefit has been of particular concern to biodiversity rich development countries. So 29 October Nagoya, Japan entered that force. Okay, a fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising out of the utilization of genetic resources, establishing more predictable condition for the access to genetic resources, helping to ensure benefit sharing when genetic resources leave the country providing genetic resources. The protocol established a legally binding. It is legally binding framework. Okay, legally binding framework for helps researcher assess genetic resources for biotechnology research, development and activities. And indigenous and local community may receive benefits through a legal framework that aspect value traditional knowledge associated with genetical resources. Nagoya Protocol apply to genetic resources that are covered Convention of Biodiversity. Benefit arising from the utilization of genetic resources, traditional knowledge associated with the genetical resources, benefit arising from the utilization of traditional knowledge. Protocol does not apply to human genetic material or to sources that were equitable before protocols come into effect. So, International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture and Framework Food and Agriculture and Framework for Pandemic Prepared for World Health Organization. Aichi Biological Targets. The 10th meeting of Conference of Party held from October, Nagoya, Aichi, Japan. They adopted a revised and updated stage plan for biodiversity, including the Aichi targets. Strategic goal: reduce the direct pressure of biodiversity and promote sustainable use. Strategic goal: to improve status and biodiversity by safeguarding ecosystem, species, genetic diversity. Strategic goal: enhance benefit to all the biodiversity and ecosystem and all fish and international stock aquatic animal. Target 6. Target 7 is under agriculture, aquaculture and forestry managed sustainably. Target 9 is invasive alien species and pathway are identical and prioritizing priorities. Target 10 is for multiple anthropogenic pressure on the coral reef and vulnerable ecosystem. Target 11 is for 70% of the terrestrial and inland water and 10% of coastal marine area conserved. Aichi target 13 is genetic diversity in cultivated plants, farm, domestic animal and relative maintain. Target 15 is ecosystem resilience and contribution of biodiversity to carbon stock be enhanced. Target 16 is Nagoya Protocol should be national legislation, and target 18 the traditional knowledge, innovative and practice indigenous and local community. So these are 18 Aichi targets are given. Target 1 was address the underlying cause of biodiversity loss. 2 was reduce the direct pressure of biodiversity, promote sustainable use. 3 was to improve the status of biodiversity, safeguarding ecosystem. 4 was enhance the benefit all of the biodiversity and ecosystem. 5 was enhance the implementation through participation, planning, knowledge management, capacity building. 6 was all fish and invasive stock and aquatic plant are managed and harvest sustainably. 7 was area under agriculture, aquaculture and forestry managed sustainably, ensuring conserving biodiversity. 9 was invasive alien species and pathway are identical and prioritize priorities species. 10 was multiple anthropogenic pressure on coral reef. 11 was 70% of terrestrial and inland water, 10% of coastal marine area. 12 was extinction of known threatened species. 13 was genetic diversity, plants and animal. 14 was ecosystem resilience and the contribution of biodiversity to carbon stock. And 16 Nagoya Protocol, and 18 was to innovation and practice indigenous and local community for biodiversity resource conservation. So these 18 target was given in the Aichi target in the biodiversity conservation. That was very important, I discussed here. Now we are discussing some other topics which are biosphere reserve. Biosphere reserve, first is IUCN 5 protected area. Protected areas are given. Okay, so about biosphere reserve is an area set aside for the conservation of the resources of the biodiversity and for the improvement in the relationship between the man and environment, man and its environment. Okay, that is the biodiversity. So biosphere reserve protected large area natural habitat often include one or more national park and along buffer zones. So these are some buffer zones are there and some national parks are there, biological diversity are there. Okay, so protection is granted not only to the fauna of the protected region but also human community also. Okay, So functions are to contribute to the conservation of landscape, ecosystem, species and genetic variation, to foster economic human development of ecological sustainable, and to provide support for research, monitor, education, information exchange related to local, national, global issues. And now three zones are there. First, this one is the core zone, and this one is the buffer zone, and this one is the transaction zone. So core zone is strictly protected ecosystem managed for minimum human interference to serve as a baseline for the biological region. Research, education, training activities carefully controlled. Traditional activities such as timber production, hunting, fishing, grazing. Buffer zone is managed by research, education, training and manipulation method technique, and limited traditional activity include timber protection, hunting, fishing and grazing. And transaction zone, also known as the area of cooperation, and larger outer area is known as the transaction zone, and this is the management of species, NGO, cultural group, stakeholder can work together. Now, what is main and animal biosphere program? This program of biosphere reserve initiative under the main and biosphere program, UNESCO 2000, UNESCO 1971. So World Network of Biosphere Reserve of Man and Biosphere Program, forest and harmonized integration of people and nature for sustainable development. To that, 651 biosphere reserve in 120 countries, including 15 transboundary sites, have been included in the Network of Biosphere Reserve. World Network of Biosphere Reserve. So they are internationally recognized, nominated by national government, and remain under sovereign jurisdiction of state. And the secretary of this program is located at UNESCO headquarters, Paris. Secretary is in Paris. And there are 18 biosphere reserve in India. There are 18 biosphere reserve in India, and 9 of the 18 biosphere reserve are part of World Network of Biosphere Reserve. So World Network of Biosphere Reserve parts are 9. Okay. So 9 of the 18 biosphere reserves are the part of World Network of Biosphere Reserve. First biosphere reserve in India to notified by Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. That is Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. That is the first biosphere reserve in that. Okay. Now we are going to come modes of conservation. How do we conserve this biodiversity? So on the side, conservation of genetic resources in natural population of plants and animals. It is the process of protecting an endangered plant or animal species in natural habitat. So we can protect them in a natural habitat. Okay, natural habitat. So this is a national park, sanctuaries, and biosphere reserve. Okay, in situ conservation. First of all, in situ conservation, that is national park, biosphere reserve and sanctuaries. It is also applied to conservation of agricultural biodiversity in agroforestry and farmer. Ex situ conservation is like seed bank, captive breeding location, animal oculation, tissue culture, botanical garden and zoological garden. So this involve conservation of genetic resources as well as wild and cultivated or species. So this is seed bank, captive breeding, animal transoculation, tissue culture bank, botanical garden and zoological garden. So protecting on endangered plant or animal species in the natural habitat is known as in situ and ex situ conservation. Okay, now we are going to go next topic, which is biodiversity hotspot. What do you understand by the biodiversity hotspot? So a biodiversity hotspot is biological region significant for reservoir of biodiversity that is under threat from human. If that is under threat for human, that is known as the hotspot. Okay, that is known as the hotspot of the biodiversity if it is under threatened position. The concept of hotspot was developed by Norman Myers. Norman Myers developed this concept in 1988 to designate priority area for the in situ conservation. Endemism, the area should be support more than 1500 endemic species of vascular plant. If there is 1500 endemic species of the vascular plant, and habitat loss is must be 70% of original habitat loss. If 70% of original habitat lost there and 100 endemic species of vascular plants, 0.5% of global population, then it is known as biodiversity hotspot. Western Ghat. Now we are talking about the Western Ghat. See, this is the Western Ghat. Okay, this area is the Western Ghat. The Western Ghat are the chain of hills that run along the western edge of peninsular India over the state of Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala. This region have moist deciduous forest. Here is the moist deciduous forest and rainforest. And the rainforest, two things are there. So there are over 6,000 vascular plant belonging to over 2500 this hotspot, of which over 3,000 are endemic. Nearly 77% of amphibian and 62% of reptile species found here. So 77% amphibian and 62% reptile. Much of the bird species such as black pepper and cardamom have their origin. And the highest concentration of species in the Western Ghat is believed to be Agastyamalai Hill in the extreme south. The region also harbor over 450 bird species, about the 140 mammalian species and 260 reptiles. The vegetation in this hotspot originally extended over 190 square kilometer. So this whole area is known as the biological hotspot. Now Eastern Himalaya. So this area of Eastern Himalaya, because one-horned rhinoceros, wild Asian water buffalo, relict dragonfly, Himalaya, the only salamander species found in this area. Major endemic birds are Himalaya quail, cheer, pleasant, western Himalaya vulture, and white-billed herons. So this is a Namdafa flying squirrel, which is critically endangered. We can found here. And 45 mammal, 50 birds, 70 reptile we can found. Eastern Himalaya hotspot is nearly 163 globally threatened species. These are estimated species of plant in Himalaya, of which 1/3 are endemic. And Eastern Himalaya as the region encompasses Bhutan, northern eastern India, and southern central eastern Nepal. Indo-Burma region. Okay, Indo-Burma region is this region. So this region encompasses several countries: eastern Bangladesh and Malaysia, northeastern India and Brahmaputra River, Myanmar, the southern part of China, Yunnan province, and Lao People Democratic Republic of Cambodia, and Vietnam and Thailand. So many of species, especially from some freshwater turtle species and endemic. It is estimated that there are about 13500 plant species in this hotspot, with over half of the endemic ginger we can found here. Sundaland. This is the area near the southeast area. Sundaland is the region southeastern Asia that cover western part of Indo-Malaya. So archipelago is there, Indo-Malaya. In India is represented the Nicobar Island. United Nations declared Iceland a World Biosphere Reserve. World Biosphere Reserve. The Iceland have a rich terrestrial and marine ecosystem that include mangrove, coral reef, seagrass lead. The marine biosphere includes several species such as dolphin, whale, dugong, turtle, crocodile, fishes, and shell. Over exploitation of marine resources and forest. Okay, these are okay. Now, critical wildlife habitat. What are the critical wildlife habitat? Critically wildlife habitat are area national park, sanctuaries are involved for the purpose of wildlife conservation. So it being the invasive scheduled tribes and other tribal forest dwellers right 2006, but the same act duly recognized the traditional right of the forest dweller. Critical wildlife habitats are designed by the central government, Ministry of Environment and Forest. Before a critically wildlife area is notified, a scientific evidence has to be provided to establish that pupil presence and prior consent of the concerned Gram Sabha. So in critical habitat, Gram Sabha's concern is very important. Ministry of Environment, Forest, Climate Change is important for that. And create the critical wildlife habitat, and consent of Gram Sabha must be obtained before the relocation the forest dweller. Okay, next one is sites. Next one is site. Site is basic conservation on the international trade of endangered species, wild flora and fauna. Wild flora and fauna. Okay, 1975. It is the site. Site ensure the international trade of wild animal and plant does not threaten the survival. Also known Washington Convention. It is known Washington Convention. Sites is also known as Washington Convention. And sites were drafted as a result of resolution adopted 1963 IUCN. IUCN World Conservation of Union Sites entered into force 1 July and 1975. Sites is an international agreement to which states adhere voluntarily. The Sites Secretariat is administered by UNEP and is located in Geneva, Switzerland. It is in UNEP and located in Geneva and Switzerland. Geneva and Switzerland. Okay. So site is an international agreement to which state adhere voluntarily. Site secretariat is administered by UNEP located in Geneva, Switzerland. International wildlife trade is estimated to worth billions of dollars. The trade in diverse ranging from live animal and plants to vast array of wild products. So wildlife products include food product, exotic leather good, wooden musical instrument, timber, tourist curious and medicines. High level of exploitation of some animal and plant species of trade has led to decrease and even extinction of certain species. So trade in the wild animal and plant. So trade in the wild animal and plant crosses border between country, hence the effort to regulate it require international cooperation. Sites protect more than 35000 species of animals or plants and not provide protection for a habitat of a species or how a species is used within a country. So sites control only the international movement of the species. Sites work by subject international trade in specimen of selected species to certain control. The species covered by sites are listed in 3 appendix according to the degree of protection. So appendix 1 include the species threatened with the extinction. Trade in specimen of this species permitted only the exceptional circumstances. Appendix 2 include species not necessarily threatened with extinction, but include species in which trade must be controlled in order to avoid utilization. And Appendix 3 includes species that are protected in the least one country with side party for assistance in controlling the trade. So, if a species is in danger extinction, then the treaty will be imposed a ban on the commercial trade of the listed species. So, commercial ban of the listed species is given in the site. Site is what? It is a legally binding. It is a draft resolution adopted by 1963 member IUCN, the World Conservation Union. World Conservation Union member are there. And it is international trade in endangered species of wildlife, fauna and fauna. So convention on that, and ensure international trade of wild animal and plant not threaten the survival. It is known as Washington Convention. Sites were drafted as a result of resolution adopted 1963 of IUCN. Sites entered into 1975. Site is an international agreement to which state adhere voluntarily. And the site secretariat is advanced UNEP, Geneva, Switzerland. International wildlife trade is estimated to the world worth billions of dollars. So wildlife protection include the food product, exotic leather good, wooden musical instrument, timber, tourist and medicine. So high level of exploitation of some animal and plant species for trade has led to decrease and even extinction of certain species. That's why site rule came here. Site work by the subjecting international trade in specimen of selected species, and species covered sites are listed in 3 appendix according to the degree. Like appendix 1 includes the species threatened with extinction, appendix 2 includes the species not necessarily threatened with the extinction, and appendix 3 includes species that were protected in at least country with the ask site party assistant. Okay, so these are the site we discussed today. Now we are going to discuss about CMS. What is CMS? CMS is the Convention on Conservation of Migratory Species. It is Convention of Migratory Species of Wild Animal. So CMS is environment treaty under the aegis of UNEP. It is again under the aegis of the UNEP. CMS provide a global platform for the conservation, sustainable use of migratory animal and habitat. And in 1983 it come in force in 1983, and secretariat located in the Bonn, Germany. It is in Bonn, Germany. Where was the site convention? That was in Geneva, but this is CMS in the Bonn, Germany. And the CMS secretaries provided the administration by UNEP. Migratory animals are essential component of the ecosystem, support all life on earth by acting as a pollinator and seed distributor. What it do? It do like a pollinator. It's act like a pollinator and a seed distributor. They contribute ecosystem structure and function. They provide food for other animal and regulate the number of species ecosystem. Migratory animal are potentially very effective. And threat to migratory species is what? Habitat loss, barrier to migration, unsustainable hunting, fishing practice, and road, like there is construction activities are there, accidents are there, harmful effect of invasive species, pollution. So these are threats. So what is the process is like appendix 1, again an appendix 2. Here are two appendix. So in one they are protects like animal, conserve, restore place they are live, and mitigate the obstacles and control the factor. And appendix 2, migratory species that need or would significant benefit from international cooperation, listed appendix 2. So the agreement may range from legally binding threat to less legally instruments such as memorandum of understanding. Okay, hope you enjoyed this. Now I'm discussing about the next one, that is Iucn Red List. Okay, Iucn Red List. Iucn Red List is a threatened species. They are the threatened species. Okay, threatened species known as Iucn Red Data List. Red Data List. Okay, that are the Red Data List. Red Data List. Iucn Red Data List, founded 1964. It is the world's most comprehensive inventory of global conservation status of biological species. Iucn is the world's main authority in the conservation status of species. A series of regional red lists are produced by countries or organizations. Iucn Red List is the set upon precise criteria to evaluate risk of thousands of species and subspecies. So risk of species and subspecies are there. So this is very important. Iucn Red List is the set upon precise criteria to evaluate the extinction risk of thousands of species and subspecies. So Iucn Red List into the 9 group. Okay, first is the extinct. If not known individual remaining, that is extinct. Extinct in wild, this is second one. Known only to survive in captivity as a naturalized population. Critically endangered, high risk, that is high risk. If there is a high risk, that is known as critically endangered. Endangered, the endangered is the risk, high risk extinction in the wild, if that is extinction in the wild. And vulnerable, high risk endangerment in the wild. If the high risk endangerment in the wild, that is known as vulnerable. And if near threatened is that, near threatened means likely to become endangered. So it is likely to become endangered in future. And data deficient means now data is not available, assessment of risk extinction. And not evaluated means has not yet been evaluated. So these are some. And now when discussing the Iucn Red List, Iucn Red List, official term threatened. Threatened is the grouping of 3 categories: critically endangered and endangered and vulnerable. So we should have idea about threatened, that is critically endangered, endangered and vulnerable. Sites aim to ensure the international trade in specimen of wild animal and plant does not threaten their survival. Okay. Now what is next? Next is mangrove.